I'm Professor Bronwyn Galanders from the University of Adelaide, and I first started diving, I guess, in Upper Spencer Gulf around 10 years ago when I moved to South Australia, and I'd always seen the Giant Australian Cuttlefish in New South Wales. When I first went to Spencer Gulf, I was interested to see what they were like, and they're much smaller than you would get on the east coast, and they really are spectacular. They aggregate at a single location there solely for the purposes of breeding, and they're completely oblivious to any divers or anybody being around. But that whole Gulf region is quite unique. It's what's referred to as an inverse estuary, which means that it's got much higher salinity at the head of the estuary, and then you get to marine salinities out towards the mouth. We've also got some remnant tropical populations, like things like blue crabs, and it's just such a unique area that it's very interesting to study. The Point Lowly area, it's one of the few areas in that Upper Spencer Gulf that has rocky reef habitat that's suitable for Giant Australian cuttlefish to lay their eggs. If you think of the cuttlefish, which are short-lived, each generation's totally dependent on the previous generation, so you have reduced numbers like you've got up there this year, and potentially you'll get reduced numbers the following year, so it becomes a slippery slope, if you like, of decreasing numbers. And in the worst case scenario, if you damage that environment, you will have no more cuttlefish. If you move out from the reef sort of habitat at Point Lowly there, you can actually see squid eggs and the like. There's a number of juvenile fish species that would use some of the seagrass or the mangrove habitats. For example, we know that snapper have a nursery area, a juvenile area in the Upper Spencer Gulf region, and that's potentially an area from which most of the snapper found in South Australia originate. We were originally interested in seeing what the impact of the desalination or a proposed desalination plant in terms of the brine would be on Giant Australian cuttlefish. So we set up an experiment using desalination brine from an existing desalination plant at a range of different salinities, and collected eggs after they'd been newly laid and had them in the laboratory tanks and raised them through to hatching. And we saw that as we increased the salinity, you got a decrease in the survival of the eggs and total mortality of the eggs at 50 and 50 parts per thousand salinity, and that compares to a background level of around 38 to 40. So you don't need to raise the salinity much and you start to see a decrease in the survival of the eggs. There's been other studies that have been done, including on squid, that shows very similar results to what we found. There's significant mining and manufacturing industry expansion for that whole Spencer Gulf region. There'll be a number of developments or significant developments that are likely to, they may not be based on right on the shore there, but they're likely to use some of the shipping, so there'll be expansion of shipping in that region. There may be further land-based inputs into the ocean. There's been very little done on Australian species in relation to how shipping noise or other noise may actually impact them, how seismic drilling, all of those sorts of things. It's an area that's wide open for future research. And there's also evidence of things like scallops here in Bass Strait potentially suffering mortality associated with some of the noise pollution. What's happening there is that the inner ear of the cephalopod, the hairs in the inner ear, seem to be damaged, which means that it can't balance properly to feed and things. I think we need a lot more scientific research in the area. If I just focus back on the Giant Australian cuttlefish, we think that that's potentially a new species. Evidence suggests that it's limited to Upper Spencer Gulf, that population, but we need to do a lot more research on that species as well as a lot of the other species, and then develop potential models where we can predict what might be happening as a result of different developments. There's significant fishery and aquaculture in that region, and it's making sure that any development that goes ahead actually can operate in such a way that those industries and other industries are not jeopardised.